guys, this is Nirpam from the Underwater Photography Guide and Blue Water Photo. Now I'm here today with a very exciting housing from Ikelite. This is the Sony A1 housing. That's for the Sony full frame mirrorless camera, which is Sony's new flagship camera. I have a full review out on this camera, so see below for details on that. But anyway, I have been diving with this housing for the past couple of weeks, and I've been really enjoying using it with the Sony A1. I've gotten some awesome content. I know the ins and outs of this housing, so I thought I'd share with you guys my thoughts on the housing. So you might notice that there's something a little bit different with this system, which is, yes, I have a housing for an Atomos Ninja 5 set right above this Sony housing. Now, the reason I'm showing you guys this is because we've been working with Ikelite on getting M24 bulkheads installed on Ikelite's high-end full frame and maybe some APS-C housings, we'll see. So if you guys are interested in shooting with an external monitor, and there are a lot of benefits for doing that, especially if you're a video shooter, then reach out to us and we can get you set up with an M24 bulkhead so you can get a monitor set up with your new Ikelite system. Particularly the Sony A1 and the Sony A7S III are great candidates for this system. Now, the most exciting thing about the A1 housing is that it fits both the Sony A7S III and then also the Sony A1. So for those of you that don't know, Sony A1 is Sony's top photo camera. It takes 50 megapixel photos at 30 frames a second. It also has some pretty amazing video features like 8K video, 4K video up to 120 frames per second, and a lot of the same video features that are available on the A7S III. However, if you're shooting in low light situations, especially like I am in cold water, then the Sony A7S III is actually a better camera for video because at higher ISOs, like 12,800 or higher, the noise is significantly reduced compared to the Sony A1. So what's exciting is that you can actually fit both cameras in this one housing, which means that if you buy two bodies and you put it in this one housing, you'll have the most economical ultimate Sony system available. Now let's get into some of my favorite features with this housing. So starting with the controls, you do have full control over the camera. There are a few exceptions when it comes to certain buttons, and I'll get into that. But I had no problem using this camera for both photo and video, and it's fully functional inside of the housing. Now, the controls that you are missing are the joystick control on the back of the camera, which is used to move autofocus points around. Now, that's not a huge deal with Sony cameras because the autofocus tracking is very good. So I do recommend using autofocus tracking if you have a Sony lens. Otherwise, I would use single point autofocus with a Metabones adapter and a Canon lens. On the left side of the camera, there is also a drive dial with an autofocus mode control. You do have control over the drive dial, but you don't have control over the autofocus mode control. If you're using a Sony lens, I recommend keeping it on autofocus continuous. The autofocus is excellent in the A1 and you really don't need it in single autofocus. But if you do want to put it in single autofocus, you'll have to do that before you put the camera inside of the housing. So I wanted to get those two button compatibility issues out of the way, but otherwise the camera works perfectly great in the housing. To control your triangle of exposure, you'll need to control your shutter and aperture in most cases with the two dials. There's one dial on the top and then one dial on the side. I found them very easy to use. You can reach them with one finger from the handle, so that's pretty nice. And then you can also reach your back button focus and shutter controls from the handle as well. And there's also extensions available from Ikelite that allow you to extend these out a little bit farther if you need that. So it's really nice because all of your main settings, your aperture, shutter speed, and your shutter are all next to your handle. Now, the only thing that you are going to have to use inside the camera is the ISO. So you will have to press the FN button, which is very accessible. And then you can select your ISO that way, or you can select the ISO button and move it up and down with your D-pad controls on the back. If you have a lens that has zoom function, then you can easily zoom in and out of the lens with this dial right here. I love Ikelite zoom controls. They're nice and big and right next to your fingers. So that's one of my favorite things about this housing. The housing also has an M16 port for extra accessories, and it has a bulkhead for Ikelite sync cords. So this is what you're going to use when you are syncing your strobes to the camera. You will need to use sync cords with the Ikelite housing, and that creates a direct electrical connection all the way from the hot shoe inside the camera up through the bulkhead and through the sync cords and back into your strobes. Now, the exciting thing about this connection is that you can use Ikelite TTL with Ikelite strobes with the Sony A1 and it is the best TTL on the market in my personal opinion. I was able to use the TTL with the A1, it's very accurate, and basically what that allows you to do is it allows you to take photos in any situation, and the strobes are gonna guess the perfect exposure for you, so you never have to touch your strobes. Now, I've been able to go on whole dive trips using Ikelite's TTL converters and never touched my strobes once, and for me, that's a really important thing when I'm considering a camera and housing option. Now, let's talk a little bit about safety. So the most important thing when it comes to safety with Ikelite housings is they all have a clear back. So you can always see exactly what's going on during your dive inside the housing. You can see if there's a little bit of water in there, some drops, anything like that, that would alert you that you need to go up, fix your housing, your camera, make sure your seal is all good. So that's even better in my opinion than a moisture alarm, because you can just see what's going on right there, right then and there. Now, there's also a vacuum valve that's built into the housing. You do need to purchase the pump separately. Now, it's very accurate, so the pump plugs right in, you pump it up, it creates a vacuum, and the pump measures in millimeters in the gauge, so it's a very accurate gauge. What that means is when you're pumping up before your dive, if you see any changes in pressure in that gauge, you'll know that the seal's not quite right, and you'll want to take a look to see if you have a hair, some sand, or something else going wrong with the system. And that saved me from a couple of dives. I even went recently, I was going diving, I had just plugged in the M24 for the first time. I checked my pump and it had gone down. I looked inside the M24 connection, and sure enough, there was a little piece of debris that was in there, and that was causing the seal not to close. So I saved my dive, I saved this very expensive camera. Even before I got in the water, the gauge was able to tell that there was something wrong. And that's the important thing about having a vacuum system, and I really do think it's worth the investment if you do get this housing to have a vacuum system built in there. When it comes to taking the camera in and out of this housing, it's very easy to do. I might mess this up a little bit because this Ninja 5 housing is a bit heavy, but all you have to do is open the back with the latches, and it's a compression O-ring, so you don't technically need to lubricate this O-ring, but it's a good idea to keep it clean. And it opens up just like that. Then when you put your you put your camera on a tray, the tray goes right into the housing, you push it in, and then you seal it up again with the latches. Now, when it comes to the trim underwater, you can see that there is a decent amount of airspace inside of the housing. With the camera, that's going to be a lot less, but that is a good thing underwater. Your housing is going to float a lot more, and I find that Ikelite housings are particularly light underwater, including the Sony A1. When I attached the Ninja 5 on top, I actually had enough airspace between the two housings that it wasn't quite floating away, but it was getting pretty close to being neutral, and I was pretty happy with the trim overall. I really didn't find that I was getting tired even with this larger system. Now, if you don't want a big heavy monitor on top, you can also attach an accessory which is called a magnified viewfinder. It screws right into where your viewfinder is, and you'll be able to look through a magnified version of what you're seeing through the electronic viewfinder on the camera. I find it's very nice to use, especially for macro photography, but I in particular tend not to use one. I just like seeing my LCD, which is also very nice on the Sony A1, and when you've got a nice clear back, you've got a lot of visibility on that camera. And the final thing I would like to talk about on this housing is the dry lock port system. So the Ikelite housing has a dry lock port system, and it's very easy to pull on and off. All you have to do is unscrew the screws, pull this guy off. Careful not to lose any of these screws. And that's it. So you would fit your lens on in here when you're changing lenses, and there is a switch right here that allows you to actually take the lens on and off inside of the housing, and then you can put your port back on. And the nice thing about the vacuum system is when you vacuum it up, the seal right on the port will actually become very tight. So even if the screws came off at any point, the port would not be able to come off because it's vacuum sealed. So that's a pretty cool function of the vacuum system on the port. The Ikelite dry lock port system is compatible with most Sony lenses and most Canon lenses with a Metabones adapter. If you have any questions at all, we have a port chart on our website at Blue Water Photo, or you can contact us and we will be happy to let you know how the compatibility is with your lens and this camera. And that is a brief overview of the Sony A1 and the Sony A7S III Ikelite housing. We have them in stock now at Blue Water Photo, so you can purchase yours now at bluewaterphotostore.com or contact us at sales@bluewaterphotostore.com, and we'd be happy to set you up with a housing. We'd be happy to get you a quote on a full system, and we have very knowledgeable staff that have had a lot of experience with Ikelite housings, so you'll be in great hands. Anyway, with that, if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Put any comments or questions that you have below. We'd be happy to respond. And we hope you have some great dives with the system, because I know I have, and the results I got have been phenomenal. So make sure you check out our review, check out our settings guides. We've had this camera in the water for quite some time now, and we'd be happy to get you set up with it too.